Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jason Jordan, APA's Director of Policy and Government Affairs, coming to you from our office in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for joining us for today's webinar. Our topic today is preparation for our Planners Day on Capitol Hill program. If you're on this call, chances are you have already signed up and registered for the event. Our goal here today is to get you fully prepared, to walk you through everything you need to know in advance of this event. I'll just say at the outset a couple of housekeeping things. One is that this webinar will be recorded and it will be posted in its entirety on the planning.org website, the APA website, and you can find the recording in the policy conference section of the website. So if you need to make reference to the slides or go back and re-listen to some of the information, that's where you'll be able to find it. We will have it up late today. The second message for you at the outset is that we very much want to answer any specific questions that you may have. So we've reserved time at the end of the program for any questions or comments from you. And you can input your question using the question box on the side of the webinar. So let's move on to talking about our program this year. Emily, if you could advance to the next slide, please. Thank you. As you probably know, the program will be held on Tuesday, September 26th. That's the last day of our series of leadership and policy conference related activities here in Washington. We'll start out the day at the Lowe's Madison Hotel with a variety of trainings and briefings, get you all set with materials. And then meetings themselves will be scheduled throughout the day, typically between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. And then we'll have our congressional luncheon on Capitol Hill from 12:30 to 1:30. And we'll talk more about some of the details of these various events as we go through the webinar today. For those of you who may be new to Planners Day on Capitol Hill, let me start with the very basics. What is this program? Planners Day is our annual opportunity to bring members of APA, planners, and the issues of the organization directly to members of Congress and congressional staff. As I mentioned, it's linked directly to the policy conference and our leadership meetings, so folks will have the opportunity to spend a day and a half hearing from a variety of speakers about planning-related policy issues, and then use that information when you head to Capitol Hill to meet directly with your representatives. We handle the scheduling for the meetings, and we provide advocacy training. I'll talk more about the different training venues and opportunities that you have, but of course this webinar itself is part of that. Why do we do this program? Well, in a pretty straightforward way, it's our best opportunity to raise the profile of our issues, the organization, and planning itself with the Congress. It gives us a chance to build solid relationships. Lots of studies have demonstrated that the most effective communications with elected officials is the face-to-face meeting with constituents. And so this is a real opportunity to either advance a relationship that you already have with your congressional representatives or really start by building a firm foundation for that relationship. It's also obviously a major opportunity for us to advance our own legislative priorities and policy concerns. As you know, this has been an interesting and in some ways trying year for a lot of our policy concerns as an organization. So this year is a particularly important opportunity for us to go to Capitol Hill to lay out our concerns and our agenda. And we have spent a lot of effort, you all have spent a lot of effort over the last couple of years building our Planners Advocacy Network. And so this is one of the real marquee events of the year for members of the network to use all the grassroots advocacy skills that you've been developing over the year and bring them directly to members of Congress. In terms of some of the training that's available, obviously we're doing the pre-conference webinar today, but you will have several other training opportunities I just want to briefly highlight. On Sunday, so the first day of the conference, there's a series of pre-conference training activities, including long boot camp on the morning there on Sunday. And I should mention that the full schedule for all the policy conference related activities is available on the website. So I realize there's not dates and times associated with everything on this slide, but you can go get all the details on the agenda at the website. But we will start the day with a boot camp for grassroots advocates. We'll have an opportunity for you to provide input and ideas on the emerging issue of policy related to autonomous vehicles. Both our research department and our policy and advocacy department are working right now on a variety of resources related to autonomous vehicles, and we wanted to include in the conference a listening session of sorts to give members and leaders a chance to shape and influence the direction of our work on AVs. That is all supplemented with a variety of leadership and communication training sessions. So we have a full day, really, of training opportunities on Sunday of the conference. On Monday, and really throughout the conference, we'll have staff available at the registration area who can provide assistance on anything related to your meeting. So if you need information on how your meeting is going to go or when or any of that stuff, there'll be a help desk available to help you get everything sorted before Planners Day. And then on the day itself, on Tuesday, we will begin with a series of briefings, both aimed at catching you up on all of the policy-related details. So anything that's changed in terms of the legislation, our specific asks, all of the policy background will be available for you there on Tuesday, as well as some additional training that's focused on how to make your meetings as effective as possible, tips and techniques on getting your message heard by members of Congress. And one thing that I should also have mentioned on Sunday, let me just backtrack for a quick second, is that we will essentially repeat this program with updated material at lunch on Sunday. So if you're there a little bit early on Sunday, you'll have a chance to go through this information one more time with us. What do we provide? Well, there are a lot of resources that are available, and some of my colleagues are going to discuss that in more detail as we go through today, but let me just give you a quick overview. As I mentioned before, we handle all of your scheduling needs, and we'll craft an itinerary for you, customized to you, and that will all be available for you digitally, which you'll hear more about in a little while. We provide this training, as well as the other events that I mentioned, and ongoing staff support all throughout the period leading up to Planners Day and on the day itself. And then there will be an array of meeting materials that will be available, some in hard copy, some in digital form, ranging from the leave behinds, as we call them, the documents that you will actually leave with congressional staff, through to all of the logistical support information. So maps, information on your congressional offices, and the forms that you will fill out to help us understand what happened in your meetings. And all of this is really driven by the Advocacy Day app that will sort of help pull all of this information together and help guide you throughout the course of the Planners Day program. And there'll be more information about that shortly. Let me run quickly through some of the questions that are most often raised by folks participating in Planners Day. The most common question is the first one here you see on the screen: do I have to make my own appointments? And the short answer to that is no. If you have registered, you've signed up, then our staff are working hard right now on scheduling your appointments, and they will prepare custom itineraries so that all of your meetings and all the information related to meetings will be presented for you, and you'll have all that information available. If you do have any special requests or problems that we need to be aware of, you can just shoot us an email there at Government Affairs, govtaffairs@planning.org, and we'll be in touch with you to address that. Will you be alone or in a group? The answer to this question really depends on exactly who is participating in Planners Day from your area. All of the appointments are driven by constituency. So your appointments are made based on the state you live in and the congressional district you live in. If there are other people from that state and district participating, then you will be having your meeting as part of a group, and all of that group information is provided on your itinerary so you can see who else from your area will be going to the meetings. In some instances, you may be the only person from your district, so you might have state meetings as a group, but your House meeting might be just you. If you need assistance, we can certainly work with you on making sure that that's available and getting you all the materials you need to be confident in conducting your meetings. How will you find out your schedule? Well, this is going to be discussed in more detail when we go through the Handy Advocacy Day app, but I will simply say that via the app, all of the itinerary information will be available and regularly updated so that prior to heading to the Hill, you can access all of your scheduling information. And I mentioned earlier, but there will be a help desk available if you have questions or problems on the Monday before Planners Day. How will you get there? As I mentioned, we will start out the day at the host hotel for the conference, the Lowe's Madison in downtown Washington. We will allow people to travel independently to Capitol Hill. Your best options would be either using the public transportation network here in Washington or to grab a taxi from the hotel. There's detailed travel information available along with your materials. Generally speaking, the House and Senate office buildings where your meetings will happen are walkable and close together, so once you get to Capitol Hill, you can move around between your meetings pretty easily on foot. Part of the reason that we don't take everyone to the Hill at the same time is that your meetings are dispersed throughout the day based on the availability with the congressional offices, so this gives everyone a bit more flexibility. But again, there'll be staff available on the day of to help you with any of your transportation needs. In terms of materials that you need to bring, you don't necessarily have to bring a thing. All of the materials that you need for your meeting will be available. Leave-behinds, the one-pagers are all provided for you. This year we are providing some new resources. You'll get a template in advance that you can fill out with your own local district information if you wish. It's completely optional, but you'll have a template to work from because some people do find it helpful to bring photos of projects or charts and graphs, infographics, other sorts of local information that can help really bolster your case. I would ask you to keep in mind the sort of limited tolerance that Hill offices have for a lot of paper. So leave your 40-page plan and your 500-page project documents back in the office, but a nice one-page summary of key local activities can be effective. And again, we'll be working with you if you're interested in putting that kind of resource together. But don't fret, there will be the basic leave-behind materials all provided for you. Will I meet with a congressman? Well, the answer there is it depends. We certainly make every effort to schedule the appointment directly with the member of Congress. But this will be a busy week, and schedules are always challenging on Capitol Hill. So many of the meetings, most of the meetings, will be with staff. But it's important to underscore the importance and the critical role that staff play. So having a meeting with a staff person is in no way to suggest that the meeting isn't important or valuable. In fact, you may have a much more substantive exchange with the staff person who handles the issue and be able to go into more detail. So we will request a meeting with a member of Congress, but you may well end up meeting with staff. But your itinerary will reflect the latest information we have about the person with whom you'll be meeting. In terms of what you should do in advance, we're going to have a section of slides toward the end of today's webinar that give you some specific guidance. But in general, If you're on the call today, you're doing the right thing. Take advantage of the resources in the training programs. Think about the issues that you're going to raise, how you want to raise them, examples, particularly local examples, so that you can kind of prepare a script of sorts for how you want to engage the staff person or the member of Congress in your meeting. You will be able to eat during the course of the day. Breakfast will be served at the hotel. We'll have a box lunch available during the luncheon on Capitol Hill. If you need anything throughout the day, there are a range of cafeterias scattered throughout the congressional campus, so you shouldn't have any challenges with either a place to sit down and rest in between meetings, or if you need to get refreshments. And then, of course, we will have the two food events during the day. In terms of luggage, the best approach really, even though it may not necessarily be the most convenient, is to leave your luggage at the hotel. You can certainly bring small bags to congressional offices, but there's no luggage storage available to you on Capitol Hill, and you will be subject to security screening, so it'll take longer to get through the more materials that you have. If you're traveling by train, there are luggage lockers at Union Station, which is the main Amtrak station, and is also pretty close to the Senate office building, so that may be an option for you as well. But really the easiest thing is to make your travel arrangements in a way that would allow you to leave luggage at the hotel and then swing back by before leaving. So I'm going to turn the program over now to Katie, who's going to walk you through the Advocacy Day app, which is really your most important resource as you prepare for Planners Day on Capitol Hill, and certainly once you're here on site. So Katie, take it away.
Thank you so much, Jason. So for those of you that I haven't met yet, I'm Katie Akaki, and I'm part of the team that has been scheduling your congressional visits. I just want to spend some time today going over our Advocacy Day app, which has a lot of great tools and resources that you'll be able to take advantage of before, during, and after your Hill visits. Some of you may have used the app in previous years, and you'll have access to it again this year as well. You all also should have received an email a little bit earlier this afternoon from APA about the app. So don't worry about furiously scribbling any of this down. In addition to having access to the recording of this webinar, a lot of the information that you need in order to access the app is included in that email that went out a couple of hours ago. So Advocacy Day is a multi-platform app. It's available for iPhone or iPad in the App Store and for Android in the Google Play Store. You just search Advocacy Day, all one word, or you can also access a web version of the app from the link listed here. And that email that you received earlier today will have detailed instructions on how to download and use the app, as well as your personalized login. If for any reason you did not receive the email, please let us know as soon as possible, and we'll get you the information that you need. Today I just want to go over the basic features for you and give you an idea of what you'll be able to do with the app now and what you'll be able to do with the app later. Next slide, please, Emily. So the first thing I want to mention is that while the app will provide your full meeting schedule, you're not going to be able to see your schedule in the app just yet. We're still in the very infantile stages of scheduling your meetings. Most congressional schedulers won't finalize a meeting until closer to 1 week out. So if we had your schedule enabled now, there wouldn't be much going on there. So when you log into the app, you're automatically brought to the schedule page. And for now, all you'll see there is a disclaimer that your schedule is currently disabled. Down the line, when we enable your schedule, you'll be able to view all of your meeting details, and you'll also receive a push notification if there's a change to one of your meetings. We'll also call you with any changes when you're on the Hill, which is why we asked for your cell phone number during registration. And I also just want to note that once you get closer to the date, your meeting schedule is also going to be emailed to you as well. And we'll also have a printer on site at the help desk if you'd like a printed copy of your schedule. So don't worry, if you're not an app person, you'll still have access to your schedule in other ways as well. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. So let me also briefly go over some of the features you'll be able to utilize once you're on the Hill and in your meetings. First, you'll be able to map to your meetings using GPS-enhanced walking routes. You'll also be able to take notes about your meetings, view talking points that you should try to touch on during your meetings, and view your leave behind materials right in the app. And you also have the option to email these electronic versions of the leave behinds. So for example, in addition to handing a piece of paper to the person you met with in the office, you could email it directly to them as well as a form of follow-up. You'll also be able to fill out a feedback survey about each of your meetings, which we highly encourage you to do. It's very helpful for APA staff to get that feedback about how your meetings went and see if any follow-up needs to be done. There are also some social features in the app that you can take advantage of. You can post to Twitter or Facebook straight from the app, and you can also send messages to other participants through a secure chat platform. So for example, if you're trying to coordinate with someone who's in the same meeting as you, you could send them a message securely through the app to coordinate on when and where to meet up. Next slide, please. So now let's go over the features that you can take advantage of right now as soon as you log in. One of the first things that you can and should do is research the members of Congress that you'll be meeting with. From the Legislator tab in the app, the members whose offices you will be meeting with will be listed, and you can click on any of your legislators to read through their bio, view their committee and subcommittee information, look through their various social media pages, look at their website, and see a running news feed with any recent articles in which they were mentioned. You'll also be able to review the bills that are relevant to your issues. So for each bill, you can see a summary of the bill, the current status of the bill, whether your legislators have co-sponsored or not, and whether there have been any votes on the bill. There's a few bills in the app, so you want to make sure that you scroll through and look at each bill individually. And additionally, as soon as you log into the app, you will also have access to the document section where you can review any materials that APA has prepared for you, like briefing materials and leave behinds. So those are some of the great tools that you can use to research your members and issues in advance so that you're totally prepared when you come to DC. Next slide, please. I think maybe go back one slide. I believe there's a slide with my contact information. Okay, it's not here. We'll get that out to you. We'll make sure it's included in the slides that are on the website. But if you have any questions at all, you can reach out to me. My email address is kyakaci@advocacyassociates.com. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to APA staff as well, and they'll make sure that we'll get connected. So that's it for me. Thanks so much, and I'll pass it back to Jason.
Thank you, Katie. Much appreciated. So now to talk a little bit about the specific issues and our ask, I'm going to turn the program over to another colleague, Tess Hembry, who's going to walk you through the issues we'll be discussing during Planners Day.
Thanks, Jason. So just to get started, we're going to be focusing, like we have in the past, on place-based federal programs, and new this year is a focus on infrastructure investments and proposals that may be forthcoming. So to take a look first at the climate on Capitol Hill, if you've been here before for lobby days, I think you'll be familiar with what September is like in DC. Almost universally, it's kind of a chaotic month with news happening really quickly. This year is no different. September has a lot of legislative priorities that Congress has to get through. These aren't things that they'd like to get through. These things have actual hard deadlines that they must meet. So disaster relief, both Hurricane Harvey and Irma will require significant supplemental spending that they'll need to deal with very soon to allow disaster relief to move forward. Something called the debt ceiling expires on September 29th, and I'll get more into that in a minute. The fiscal year ends on September 30th, and there's a whole bunch of authorizations that expire that are important. The FAA, flood insurance, the Children's Health Insurance Program, and a few other things. So these are it's a pretty big agenda for Congress, who isn't used to necessarily passing so many things at one time. So it's a big list for them. And a lot of us came back to Washington, D.C. after August recess, assuming that these things would get pushed off until the very end of the month. Congress likes to procrastinate on things, and it's usually easier to make a deal and get something done when you're really butting up against that deadline. But second day back after August recess, it seems like some of these things might be moving a little bit more quickly than we anticipated. So the climate here is changing constantly, and so I would urge you to take whatever I say right now with a grain of salt, because I'm watching as we speak C-SPAN change what I was about to tell you. So make sure that you check back in with us at any of the updates that we'll be giving during the conference so that you are up to speed on what's happening. So shifting over to specifically what we'll be asking you to talk about in your meetings, support for federal place-based investments, specifically the Community Development Block Grant Program, TIGER, New Starts for Transit, Choice Neighborhoods Initiative, and Community Development Block Grant Program, apparently listed twice. So taking a look at what the status of appropriations is right now, the current fiscal year is going to end on September 30th, so we'll start fiscal year 18 on October 1st. Luckily, our lobby day is not on October 1st this year. Some of you may have been around for the Hill Day when we were trying to navigate a shutdown federal government, which was a whole lot of fun for us, but thankfully we'll avoid that this year. Because appropriators and Congress didn't manage to finalize the full budget and appropriations process, in theory they're supposed to have passed 12 appropriations bills in both the Senate and the House, sent them to the President's desk for final signature by now. None of the appropriations bills has gone through the regular order, so we're looking at needing to fund the entire government through what's known as a continuing resolution or some sort of a stopgap measure. And what this does is just continues the previous year funding levels, so in this case it would be fiscal year 17, on into the new fiscal year so that there's no government shutdown or interruption in funding for government programs. As of a couple of days ago, there was still debate about how long a continuing resolution should last. Most years recently, they've aimed for about 3 months, which puts them the end of the continuing resolution right around middle of December. Like I said earlier, having some sort of a hard deadline to press members to get a deal done is usually pretty good tactic for passing big legislation like that. And so they like to aim for the winter holiday recess as a threat to get members to go forward with full year funding. So it looks like this year that's probably going to be the case. The Senate just moved forward with a large package that I'll talk about in a second that includes a 3-month continuing resolution that would expire on December 8th. So that'll need to be passed before October 1st, and I'm optimistic that that will be done by the time you guys arrive in Washington. So stay tuned for an update on that. There's a couple of things that we thought would complicate the conversation about passing some sort of a CR. The debt ceiling is one of them. Like I mentioned, we will reach the debt ceiling on September 29th. The Treasury has estimated. And what that means is that we no longer have the ability to repay our existing debt obligations. So this is not new spending, new programs. It's not the budget. It's just basically paying our own credit card bill. And there's a limit on how long or how much you can spend based on what Congress decides to put the limit at. And on September 29th, we will reach that point. If Congress does not act, then we will not be able to pay our debt. That's a pretty big deal just economically because it's not ideal, obviously, not to pay your debts. But in the past, raising that debt ceiling or extending that debt ceiling has been linked to appropriations, and they've used it, some members of Congress have used it successfully to leverage spending cuts. So we have paid attention to this for appropriations purposes because of, like in 2011 with the Budget Control Act, that was a result of a debt ceiling debate, and that's how we got sequestration. So even though the debt ceiling itself doesn't necessarily have a direct impact on spending or appropriations, that whole conversation about what we should be doing fiscally as a nation can really have a huge impact on how much money is available for appropriations in future years. That seems to have settled down, at least for the second. The package that I mentioned that included a continuing resolution in the Senate until December 8th also extends the debt ceiling until December 8th. So we're looking like we're setting up for another fiscal cliff, as they like to call it. But it looks like at least for now that conversation will be pushed off until a little bit later. And another thing that we thought maybe could complicate this conversation, but looks like it's being solved, is disaster relief. Some members of Congress have argued in the past that we should offset any disaster relief spending with other spending cuts. With Hurricane Irene, and I think it was 2011 or 12, they actually cut CDBG funding and pushed it over to the disaster relief for that hurricane. So it's something we pay close attention to because it has a very direct impact on programs that are important to planners. That said, so far the disaster relief packages that now have passed the House and the Senate do not include offsets. So the House passed yesterday a $7.5 billion package for Harvey disaster relief, and the Senate just a minute ago voted to move forward with a $15 billion Harvey disaster relief bill that doesn't include offsets. So far that drama is not popping up again, but again, we've got Hurricane Irene set to hit Florida this week, or Irma set to hit Florida this weekend, so it's something to keep an eye on. And like I said, the House did pass that disaster relief bill. The Senate put together a package this afternoon with that CR, the debt ceiling extension, and it included double what the House had passed for disaster relief. That was all packaged together and voted through a procedural vote in the Senate just a minute ago. So I expect that should be sent back, that Senate package should be sent back over to the House this week. But there's some really interesting politics going on with this. The president has agreed to a package deal, like in the Senate package deal, with Senator Schumer and Minority Leader Pelosi. It's an interesting arrangement between the Democratic congressional leaders and the Republican president. He said that he would agree to their offer of a 3-month debt ceiling and CR raise in exchange for delivering Democratic votes. The president went along with it and seems to think that this is a good idea, which is great, so that this doesn't become a huge dramatic issue at the end of the month that could threaten our national economy. But it's a really interesting dynamic to see this all playing out. Once the House receives that package from the Senate, it's a little unclear about what's going to happen. Ryan earlier today said that the president wanted to work on a bipartisan effort to get disaster relief done, and that's what that agreement with Schumer and Pelosi was about. But just a few minutes ago, 150 more conservative GOP members in the House sent a letter to Speaker Ryan expressing their dismay at the agreement to do this. So presumably, if Ryan does bring the bill to a vote, they will move forward with that, and it'll be a done deal. But he hasn't signaled yet whether he's willing to do that. My assumption would be that it will be done by the time you guys get here, but this has been a pretty chaotic year, so sometimes it's not good to make those kinds of predictions. All of that aside, presumably they will pass some sort of a long-term, some sort of a 3-month CR at some point in the month of September. And one thing that I would focus on in your meetings with members of Congress, regardless of how this plays out over the next few weeks, is the impact of a long-term CR on you. Since we were funding off of multiple stopgap bills this current fiscal year until May, presumably that had an impact on your ability to plan and use CDBG and home funds. It puts off the timeline for applying for Tiger and Choice grants, that kind of thing. It's a really ineffective way to govern, and it would be good for you guys to talk a little bit about how that has impacted you, if it has. And again, I would urge them to adopt a full year spending bill as quickly as possible to avoid that kind of long-term CR situation again. And looking specifically at the programs now that we have a bigger picture, what we have requested for each program as an organization is based off of a few things, most notably what our partner organizations and coalitions have requested here in DC. So the Community Development Block Grant Program, we asked Congress to provide at least $3.3 billion for. It's a $300 million increase from where we are currently and would help to restore the program to where it was about 10 years ago at about $4 billion. The home program, we asked that Congress provides at least $1.2 billion for the home program. It's currently at $900 million, so that would be about a $300 million increase. The Choice Neighborhoods program, we ask that Congress provide $200 million, which would be, I think it's about a $68 million increase from current levels. Tiger requests $550 million, which is a $50 million increase, and New Starts to provide at least $2.3 billion is authorized under the FAST Act. Next slide. Thanks. So these are just charts letting you know exactly where we stand with the programs. For the most part, they are pretty consistent, especially CDBG. Choice Neighborhoods is kind of up and down. The House has proposed only $20 million, which is barely enough for one implementation grant. The Senate increased it a little bit for FY18 to $50 million, but it's still not a significant amount of money to provide planning and implementation grants in any sort of meaningful way. CDBGs had pretty consistent support across the board. There hasn't been an increase in CDBG in a number of years, so that's why we asked for that, but both the House and the Senate at least have decided to carry forward with level funding. The Tiger program, and one of my numbers disappeared. The Tiger program is a controversial one within the House. They have chosen to eliminate it, just like the President did, which is unfortunate. It's currently funded at $500 million, and that missing value there is the Senate's proposal of $550 million, which would be a $50 million increase. And then the New Starts program. Jason, do you want to talk about that? Are you?
Sure. I can say a quick word about that. So the New Starts program, this is the pipeline for major new transit investments. This program was funded, as you can see, at $2.3 billion. The administration proposed essentially eliminating New Starts funding down to the level that would cover the communities who have current agreements. So there would be no new starts under their proposal. And that was left largely in place by the House. Now, there's some funding in the House bill for New Starts, but it wouldn't cover new projects. It would largely be spent on the Gateway Rail Tunnel project connecting New York and New Jersey, and then the programs that are already in the pipeline. So no additional funds for other projects. The Senate bill is a bit better, certainly, and would allow for some new projects. So you can see there the difference. We are calling for so-called full funding, the full authorized amount for the final 18 amount.
Thanks, Jason. Oh, sorry, can you go back one more time? Thanks. Okay, so the big picture on appropriations, the numbers are important, but we'll have handouts for you, so you don't have to commit them to memory. But the big picture is that the President's budget chose to eliminate all of these programs, and the House and the Senate, Tiger aside, decided to restore these programs. So just make sure that you communicate to your members of Congress that you appreciate the fact that the House and the Senate did reject the President's proposal, and talk really personally about how the programs impact your community, because we may have won this year, but it's going to be a long haul over the next few years to make sure that these programs continue to exist. So the more members of Congress understand the impact, the better off we'll be.
Great, thanks, Tess. I'll pick up a little bit here on a couple of related issues that we think could be valuable parts of the conversations that you have with congressional offices during Planners Day. As you all are well aware, there's been a lot of talk, not a lot of action, but a lot of talk about infrastructure spending, and there continues to be efforts to try to move a package forward. We've seen principles, but we haven't seen formal legislative language from either the White House or congressional committees, but it continues to be a point of interest and debate. Earlier this year, the APA Board of Directors adopted a pretty basic set of principles that APA believes should guide any new infrastructure package that comes out of the Congress. So there'll be materials available to you that outline these principles that you can see there on the screen. And it's really just a chance to highlight the fact that infrastructure investment is a legislative priority for APA, that many communities face a serious crisis with infrastructure, but that how we structure any new package matters a great deal, and that we think these principles are incredibly important for constructing any new infrastructure package. And this relates back, of course, to some of the programs that Tess was just talking about, whether it be Tiger or CDBG, that provide funding. So making the point that we don't want to see any sort of new package come at the expense of proven programs, but that as we think about moving beyond existing programs into additional infrastructure, that these are principles that can guide that debate. And if you go to the next slide, we are all too well aware that much of the country will be talking about and dealing with disaster issues. And so we do plan to highlight some of the hazard mitigation and disaster planning issues as part of the package of materials, and folks will have the ability to adopt this into their conversations as you find relevant for your own community. I just highlighted here on the slide some of the big picture issues. Tess mentioned the movement of disaster aid through the Congress now. That figure reflected here on the slide is what the House approved yesterday. The Senate package that just went through is considerably higher than that, but that aid is certainly a big part of this equation. But there's some other more specific issues, specific in the sense of specific to the appropriations process and the larger kind of public policy framework for hazard mitigation. One, there are challenges to the Pre-Disaster Mitigation Fund. It was eliminated in the President's budget. It is funded in both the House and Senate packages, but I think it's important that we register our support for trying to get ahead of these disasters and with mitigation and good planning. The flood insurance program, as Tess noted, expires at the end of the month. There are a lot of mitigation planning and mapping issues associated with the flood insurance program. So beyond the changes to the insurance itself, there's a lot of important planning related concerns that are likely to be associated with that we can highlight. And then lastly, just a few weeks ago, there was an executive order that rolled back earlier rules requiring certain evaluations of flood resiliency, hazard resiliency in federal infrastructure funding. So certainly Hurricane Harvey has pointed out how critical it is that as we make these federal investments, that we're being thoughtful about the potential hazard implications. So we will have materials on this, and you'll have a chance to talk about it. There are some special meetings and events that happen in conjunction with Planners Day this year. We will have our luncheon featuring Congressman Rodney Davis of Illinois talking about infrastructure. And because the Great Places program kicks off in October, we will be having a number of meetings related to Great Places to highlight those communities for the relevant members of Congress. That'll also be a big highlight of a reception on Monday night, where we'll be celebrating 10 years of Great Places in America with a reception on Capitol Hill. Let me turn now to getting you prepared for your meetings. I want to talk a little bit about sort of some meeting basics, the audience, your message, and some things that you can do in advance to get fully prepared for your meetings. If you could go to the next slide. So let's begin with just some very broad principles. Don't try to be concerned about being the expert on all the things that Tess is an expert in terms of the appropriations process. The most important thing you can bring to these meetings is your expertise on planning in your community. It is more than okay to not know the specific legislative answer. What's most important is that you express the view as an expert, as a constituent, as someone working with these programs on the ground in your community. I mentioned before that staff meetings are very important, so don't dismiss the role that staff play in all of this. We always warn people that the logistics can be challenging when you're dealing with congressional offices. The offices are small. This time of year, very busy with committee hearings and votes. So you may be asked to meet in the reception area or in a hallway, or to meet the member coming out of a hearing room. These are all pretty standard things that happen on a day-to-day basis, especially when the Hill is busy. In no way does it diminish the importance of your meeting. You are expected to have something that you ask for. Some people feel a little shy about having a request, but that's really a fundamental part of the meeting process, and so that's built into the expectations that they have, so don't be nervous about that. And then, of course, we always try to remind folks that the goal here is building a relationship over time with the office, with the member of Congress, and with the staff. So think about the Planners Day on Capitol Hill meeting itself as the start of an advocacy process, not the end point. So, knowing your audience. Katie mentioned some of the terrific features in the app that can help a great deal with this. There are also clearly resources available online as well. But it's useful to give a little bit of thought to your representative's background, his professional background, other sorts of interests that he may have or she may have. It will help you in terms of framing these programs and this discussion in a way that's particularly relevant. So, for instance, that member of Congress may have held a local elected office, and so when they were on the city council, maybe that gives them a window of understanding planning issues and helps you localize the context. Think, too, about any key committee roles. So if you find out that the person you're meeting with serves on, say, the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, then that makes them particularly important and relevant in the infrastructure discussion and is a point that you can underscore in your meetings. Give some thought to their key issues. Oftentimes you'll find that a member of Congress has a priority issue or two, and that there may be some ways to link what you're there to talk about with things that are already a high priority for the office. It's just about messaging and framing in some instances. Clearly, they may have taken positions in previous votes, in previous years, in previous elected offices. To the degree that you can find that information out or know about it, it's really, really useful for you to know where they have been and how they have engaged on the issue. If you have staff relationships, then that certainly comes into play here. You can reference work that you may have done with the local staff office or with other staff in that office on different issues. And then lastly, think about any community connections, groups that you may be a part of, organizations that may be particularly supportive of either some of these programs or some local projects. So try to get a little bit into the mind of that staff person or that member of Congress as you think about the arguments and the stories that you want to make. Then focus on building your message. So once you've done that bit of background, think about how you want to package all of the information we've given you into a storyline, into a narrative. And there are just some pretty straightforward suggestions here. One, establish your credibility as both a constituent as well as expert on these programs and expert on these issues. So use your role as a planner with a good grasp of the local context and local priorities and capital projects and so forth. That's a big part of why you're sitting there in that office and why they should be listening to you. Think about the overall context. Could be things that are happening nationally, could be some specific context of activities or the economy, for instance, in your local area. Localize the issue. One of the most important things that you can provide as a constituent is helping the office understand how these programs are needed or how they play out at the local level, how all of these things factor into local plans. One of our perennial suggestions is to think about personal stories. It doesn't have to be your story per se, but stories that you can tell about human impacts in the local community really bring the meeting to life and help them understand why you're asking for what you're asking for, what the impact of that project is. And those stories can be about the value that previous funds have delivered in the community, or it can be a demonstration of why they're needed and show what the need is for local people that these programs can help solve. You do want to get the issue information, so some of that's provided here. More information will be in the one-pagers, but you can also think about accessing information that's related to, how, say, CDBG or Tiger has benefited your community in the past. But you do want to have some of those facts and figures, but I don't think you want to rely on them in lieu of some of the local and personal information, but they are important. Then you want to make your ask, and Tess went through those, and then set yourself up for follow-up so that, again, this becomes the start of a conversation and not a one-off meeting. And then Trevor's going to talk about this in a minute, but there's lots that you can do on social media to reinforce your visit and the issues that we are raising. Talk a little bit here about getting your facts, and these are just some suggestions. There are lots of other ideas that you may want to use here, but when you're thinking about the local aspect of this, look around in your office, your agency, for the results of previous federal investments in your community, or projects that are already planned that hinge on some federal involvement of any sort. Think about the economic and social data, the context that these projects would happen in your community. Oftentimes, as planners, you have access to a lot of economic and demographic information, which can really help make the case. That could be also in the form here of the next item, which is defining the need through statistics and data to help demonstrate why there's a specific project that the community is pursuing and how the fact that these programs are available could help make that a reality. It's also beneficial to think a little bit about detailing who local champions might be, or other supporters. Could be an elected official, could be business leaders, could be faith-based institutions. It's often helpful for the office to know the other players and institutions who are lined up in support of projects to help make the overall political case. So these facts will just help you be confident and comfortable in the way you frame the overall ask for the programs. So here's just an example. This isn't intended to be a script, but it's just intended to give you a sense of how, once you've done that homework, you could weave them into a storyline that you use in the office. So this takes community development block grants as an example, where you could say, X dollars in previous CDBG funds led to this specific project in this specific neighborhood in our community, and that it leveraged, whatever the amount of additional private investment, or generated these specific benefits. Could be jobs, could be other economic development. It's a way of using those local facts to talk about the proven value of the program in the community. And then you can look to the future. And so with whatever the additional amount of CDBG funding would be, combined with what we're putting in locally, we could build this specific project in this specific neighborhood that's called for in our specific plan, and we've identified these specific benefits. Then you demonstrate a little bit of the need by talking about the specific neighborhood, some of the need data context there, could be unemployment rates, for instance, and then how it's connected to things that maybe that office has already been supportive of, like a local comprehensive planning process. And then, as I mentioned before, identifying those other champions who are also on board with the project. So this is just a way of thinking about who are the people that you might want to go to in your office before you get on the plane to come to Washington, to really help round out the way you talk about these federal programs in a way that tells the local story. And this isn't just for CDBG. Could be for Tiger. It could be for New Starts. It's whatever is relevant to the work that you're doing, because these meetings are intended to blend together sort of our big picture federal program priorities, but to really advance what you're doing in a local context or in a statewide context. So here's just some things as you're doing your homework, getting ready for your meetings. You want to talk with local colleagues to try to get the information that we were just talking about. Look for those past projects and plan projects. Review local stats that may be kicking around your office. Certainly you want to use the app and other resources to get that background and issue history. Take a look at those one-pagers which are available in the app, but I do want to note that those could be updated based on changes in information and legislative process as we go forward. And if you have local materials, could be maps, could be infographics, those sorts of things that could be used to highlight what's happening locally, pull those together into a format that could be useful in your meetings. And then lastly, I don't think you have to write it out word for word, but do sort of prep a script for yourself. It'll really boost your confidence. And then, of course, after your meetings, you want to build that relationship. Social media, thank yous, demonstrating that you're going to stay engaged are all excellent ways, as well as leveraging the fact that just a couple days later, at the start of October, a National Community Planning Month begins. So there may be some opportunities to engage that office directly in those activities. With that, let me turn it over to Trevor Grady. Trevor handles our Grassroots Network, Planners Advocacy Network, and he's going to talk about some social media and some things you can do if you're not going to be in D.C. Trevor?
Thank you, Jason. And Emily, can we go back one slide? Jason positioned this Capitol Hill Day opportunity perfectly in a previous slide when he suggested that rather than think about this as an end of the interaction with your representatives, you should think of it as the beginning of your relationship. After all, legislators and their staffs meet with hundreds of people throughout the calendar year, and they chose to meet with you guys. And the best way to ensure that your name remains top of mind for them is to continue to build that relationship even after your meeting is over. As Jason suggested, at this point you will have already met with the member or staff, made your ask, told your story, and left your leave behind materials. And this time will be to reinforce your ask in your community stories and remind them of your encounter. Immediately following your meeting, a best practice is to take to social media after your event. While APA will have a professional photographer and staff members patrolling the halls to snap pictures, we still encourage personal photos and lots of selfies. Take a picture with legislative staff, the member, or in front of the member's office, and be sure to share it on social media. After your immediate follow-up on social, it's always best to send a thank you note as well. They're constantly packed. These representatives and staff are constantly packed, and you want to show that you valued their time just like they valued your input. So send a thank you email and feel free to draft up your own by outlining the topics discussed in your ultimate ask. Or even easier, you can just head to our Advocates Toolbox on APA's website where you can find a sample thank you letter as well. All you have to do is fill in the blanks and hit send. Stay engaged. Keep your legislators accountable by following their efforts after your meeting, so follow them on social media as well. Read our Planners Advocacy Network e-newsletters. Follow us at APA Advocates on Twitter. And then invite your representatives to a local National Community Planning Month event. So after the policy conference has completed, there won't be much time till our next big advocacy effort begins, which is October, and that is National Community Planning Month. This is a time when APA is celebrating the planning behind the places, the communities we love most. APA just recently launched our new toolkit so we can help planners spread the word about the value of planning to the public and elected officials. And this year we're also helping folks invite their elected officials as well with a new action alert up in the toolkit where advocates can now get staff assistance in inviting their representatives to community events. And then I'll move to social media. So as I discussed before, while leveraging social media is a great way to follow up with your legislators after meetings have concluded and while you're in D.C., it's also good to get social beforehand. It's a great best practice to follow your representatives on Twitter and Facebook so you can successfully follow their common talking points and frame your issues, as Jason mentioned, according to their messages during your meetings. Some best practices to keep in mind while you're on the Hill is to ensure to use our hashtag, and that is right there for you, hashtag APAPAC17. That will be seen all over the place and on social media. Tag your representatives as well on Twitter and make sure you're following them beforehand. And make sure to use those pictures you've taken along the way. Afterwards, feel free to follow up. After you have left DC, feel free to follow up with your legislators on social media by thanking them as well as through that email. And for more in-depth best practices surrounding social media advocacy, be sure to check out our advocacy boot camp during the policy conference on Sunday starting at 9:15. That opportunity will primarily focus on hands-on advocacy opportunities and the utilization of social media for advocacy efforts. While most people listening in on this webinar will be physically attending Planners Day, it's important to know that you're not alone. We're urging planning advocates across the country to amplify your voice while you're on the Hill, and they will do so by participating in Virtual Planners Day. For those of you who will not be attending Planners Day on Capitol Hill, more information will be heading your way through Planners Advocacy Network emails. As an outline, advocates who cannot make it Tuesday's event will have many different opportunities to take action to stand up for planning. All these opportunities will be made available through APA's easy-to-use action alerts that can be sent off in minutes, including drafted social media posts, call script that's easily accessible, and the previously mentioned action alert where you can get APA staff assistance to plan a National Community Planning Month event. This concludes all of our post-Planners Day opportunities and Virtual Planners Day events. Stay tuned for all of those coming soon. I will hand it back over to our Policy Director, Jason Jordan, to answer any questions that may have came to your mind during this webinar.
Hey, thanks, Trevor. That's great. If you do have questions, do feel free to send them in directly using the webinar system. I have a question here regarding the National Flood Insurance Program and whether NFIP and similar programs can be extended through a CR-like approach. The answer to that is yes, and in fact the answer to that is it's probably going to be handled that way. We do expect that the flood insurance program, which expires at the end of September, will be extended through some mechanism that might extend it for 3 months, 6 months, something of that nature, in order to give time for Congress to finish working on some of the bills that have been introduced already on this topic. So there's already been legislation passed through the House Financial Services Committee. There's pending bills in the Senate Banking Committee. Hard to see those making them all the way through the legislative process before this program would expire, but it's really quite unthinkable that they would let the insurance program expire at the moment. So I think we can expect to see some of that CR-like extensions, and in fact, it's not impossible that it could be included in some way in some of that appropriations work. We'll have to wait and see, but certainly something to keep an eye on. But regardless of if the program is extended beyond September 30th, by the time we get to Planners Day, it's important to tee up some of those concerns related to flood insurance if that's a big issue for your community. So it's a chance to talk about things like bolstering the mapping program or expanding the mitigation assistance program there. That's the only question I see right now that's been posted. If you have other questions, contact me. My contact information is there on the slide, or any of the staff who participated in today's call. We're all available to assist you and make sure that all your questions get answered in advance of Planners Day on Capitol Hill. Thank you all so much for agreeing to be part of Planners Day this year. We look forward to welcoming you to Washington at the end of the month. Thank you all for joining us, and we will see you soon.